My guest today, Sandra Steingraber, Ph.D., is an author and cancer survivor who is an internationally recognized award-winning expert on the environmental links to cancer and reproductive health. She's been invited to lecture at many universities, medical schools, and hospitals, including Harvard, Yale, Cornell, Columbia, and the Woods Hole Research Center, and has testified in the European Parliament before the President's Cancer Panel and participated in briefings to Congress. Dr. Steingraber is the author of the highly acclaimed book, Living Downstream, an ecologist's personal investigation of cancer and the environment, as well as she's the subject of a documentary by the same name. Her book begins with this story. There was once a village along a river. The people who lived there were very kind. These residents, according to parable, began noticing increasing numbers of drowning people caught in the river's swift current. And so they went to work devising ever more elaborate technologies to resuscitate them. So preoccupied were these heroic villagers with rescue and treatment that they never thought to look upstream to see who was pushing the victims in. Living Downstream is a walk up that river. Well, welcome to your supernatural life, Sandra.
Well, thanks, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
You're welcome. I just loved your book. You write so beautifully and said things in ways where I had several aha moments. For one, I now understand why plastics made from petroleum can mess with our hormones. I never kind of got that until I read your book. And, you explain how fossil fuel comes from dinosaurs and that their DNA is in some small way still attached to the oil, which is now chemically similar to our DNA. So I'm sort of paraphrasing, how you so eloquently put it. But let's talk about these chemicals and how many chemicals in commercial use are considered carcinogens.
Okay. Well, we can start with oil, and just to be really clear, there's no more chromosomes left in the oil of the dinosaurs left under the ground. But indeed, when we say the words fossil fuel, which sort of trips off our tongues really easily, what we really are referring to liquefied animals in the case of oil and liquefied plants in the case of coal that are under the ground that we dig up, and we either light them on fire to run our energy systems or for our transportation systems, or we use them as feedstocks to make things like plastic, and plastic really is the solid form of petroleum. And in so doing, these hydrocarbons are on the one hand they look inert, they last for a long time, they never really get broken down, but they're also, when they're inside our bodies, they can be biologically active, and often that's because these plastics have to be slathered with plasticizers to either make them soft or make them rigid, and these chemicals like phthalates or bisphenol A can be hormonally active and sort of tinker with our cellular signals, and that's what we're worried about.
No, you mentioned phthalates also in your book, and you said that they're, in addition to being in makeup and perfumes, but they're also being found in foods like eggs, milk, cheese, margarine, and seafood. So how are they measured in these foods, and how can we avoid them, or are we supposed to basically be giving up dairy and seafood now?
Well, I'm not. My whole message is not that we, as people, should be giving up anything, but rather we need to reform our chemical system to get these chemicals out of our air, food, and water, so we can freely eat up and down the food chain as we wish.
So where is it coming from? The packaging?
Well, we don't always know because, in fact, we're not really required to monitor or test for many chemicals, and so when we find these things like phthalates in the urine of people, and we know that they're there, we know that exposures are ubiquitous because, in fact, the Centers for Disease Control does kind of biomonitor a cross-section of the American population, and so phthalates look universal. But because we don't have necessarily the right to know what chemicals are added to everything, including personal care products, we don't always know what the route of exposures are. We do know that women who are pregnant and equipped with personal backpacks that have air monitors in them, that in fact there are phthalates in the air of almost all pregnant women who were in this part of this New York City study. This was work done by my colleagues at Columbia University School of Public Health. And we know that the more perfume women wear, the higher their phthalates. And so these phthalates are not only found as plasticizers, they're also added to other consumer products.
Right. So, yes, it was really eye-opening to realize and kind of depressing to see how things have changed, specifically in the area where you grew up. Now, you talk about your battle with cancer, bladder cancer, at the young age of 20, which was really surprising. And so tell our listeners what made you suspect that the cancer you had was environmental and not like a genetic, because I know that you said that your family, there was a lot of cancer in your family, but tell us what was going on.
Well, I was in fact diagnosed in between my sophomore and junior years of college, and it was really a question asked me by my diagnosing physician while I was still kind of exhaling anesthesia, lying in the hospital bed, that prompted me to begin gathering string on the question of the links between cancer and the environment. He asked me if I, had ever smelted aluminum or vulcanized tires. And of course, I was a kind of high achieving winner of the Elks Club scholarship, and I was not doing any of those things. But his questions led me to ask questions about what we knew about the environmental exposures to bladder cancer, and it turns out we know quite a lot with data going back 100 years. And I was also shocked to learn that just because we have absolute proof in some cases that certain chemicals cause bladder cancer, it doesn't mean that we automatically phase out of use and production of those chemicals. Meanwhile, other people in my family were getting cancer. In fact, my mom and I were in treatment at the same time together. We were co-cancer patients. My mom was diagnosed in her mid-40s with metastatic breast cancer, and her prognosis was always more grim than mine. My aunt went on to die of the same kind of bladder cancer that I had. And I have, continue to have cancer in my family. My cousin, who's just my age, I'm 51 now, has just been diagnosed with colon cancer. I've had colon polyps myself.
Wow.
And I have uncles with prostate and colon cancers and so forth. But the punchline to my family story is that I'm adopted.
Right.
And so I knew at a young age as an adoptee that what I shared in common with these cousins and my mother and my aunt it was not just a cancer diagnosis, and it was also our environment. We all grew up in Illinois, and so when I became a PhD biologist, I had this kind of wonderful opportunity as a postdoc at Harvard to really begin investigating the links between cancer and the environment. I not only did that research in the Harvard Medical School library, but that at some point I moved into my sister's basement back in Central Illinois and became a kind of environmental detective there. And so the book and the film, having Living Downstream, is really sort of two stories in one. On the one hand, it's my best attempt as a biologist to summarize what we actually know about cancer and the environment, but it's also a love story between me and my hometown.
Right. Again, it's just so beautifully written. It was surprising because, a book about environmental toxins, you just don't think it would be that poetic
well, it's very consciously done that way because I don't actually see this issue as depressing. I actually see it as intensely hopeful because, there's nothing we can do about our ancestors. And so if it had turned out that genetics actually plays the lion's share, that has the lion's role in creating the burden of human cancer, I would feel terribly depressed because whether we know who our ancestors are or not, and in my case I don't, there's still nothing we can do about them.
Right.
But there's everything we can do about chemicals in the environment. We're the ones who invented this whole big chemical industry and decided to run our whole economy on fossil fuels and use fossil fuels as feedstocks to make all this stuff. So we don't have to do that. We could do something different. That, to me, seems like a really hopeful approach. And so I wanted the language of the book to be hopeful, and I wanted it to be lovely, as lovely as the biological systems that I was describing.
It is lovely. So before we get to the good news, I want to just focus a little bit of, and educate people about what they're being exposed to. And so, again, you just wrote so beautifully about your family's farm and the landscape that's changed in Illinois. And I had this other aha moment when you wrote about pesticides, because you said that pesticides don't just stay on the plants. They evaporate and drift into the air. They fall as rain. They're found in snowflakes, in fog and wind and clouds and backyard swimming pools. So why do so many farmers feel that they still have to use pesticides? And do they not know how persistent they are in the environment?